Welcome everybody to another episode of the I'm Doing Great podcast with your hosts, myself, Mike, and Gina over there.
Hello.
We got something to plug. It's not a sponsorship, but it's our own stuff. And I'm excited to talk about it.
It's exciting.
Are you?
I'm actually very excited about this.
Okay, so for all of you guys out there, it's called Locals. And if you're not familiar with Locals, it's like a Patreon, but better. We won't ever get banned for saying whatever we want. You can go on there. We're going to post content that we're not going to post anywhere else. Right? Like, can you explain it a little bit better?
Yeah.
Than what I just did?
So there's basically two ways that you can join our Locals community. You can be a free member, which is cool. You can get the free stuff, or you can be a paid subscriber, which is you get access to all the exclusive content that we're not going to post anywhere else. So it is similar to a Patreon in that sense, but we're going to be doing, Mike will kind of speak more about what the content that he's going to do, but this is going to be a one-stop shop for, we are definitely going to talk about topics in politics and culture that we get into on the show, but we can talk about in more depth on the Locals page. But we're also going to be doing more content about like behind the scenes, lifestyle, family, personal stuff. So, one of my first videos is, I know a lot of women were shocked when I told them that you need to stop washing your face and your hair so often. So I'm going to do a sort of a behind the scenes video on skincare and makeup and things like that. And then I'll also do a video on like intergenerational living, like kind of how my family's set up and why I love it and recommend it. And then Mike can talk about what
Well,
he's
we're going to
do.
post multiple times a week, right?
Right.
Keep you guys pumped up with content. I'm going to come out with something called Tuesdays with Mikey. So if anyone's ever heard of the book Tuesdays with Maury, have you heard of Tuesdays?
Yes.
Okay. Landon's heard of it. Gina hasn't.
I hadn't heard of it.
Where I'm just going to go through the books that are on my bookshelf because I know a lot of you guys are interested in what we're reading. So I figured I can do a little bit of review videos on some of these books. And then another idea that I had for a weekly video was going to be about quotes and talking about quotes that I really enjoy. I think that could be cool. And then Gina had mentioned it would be a good idea if you thought my wife to post like recipes or talk about being a mom or talk about, veganism or anything like that, which I'm sure a lot of our guests don't want to hear about anyway. But my wife is actually one of the most healthy women that I know outside of Gina for sure. But like, I think she'd be a very valuable person to.
I think a lot of people would actually love to hear from your wife.
Okay.
Even if they may not eat the same diet as she does, I think there's still a lot to learn from your wife.
How do you stand it? How do you stand Mike?
Oh, how do you stand Mike? I thought you were saying stand like the
No,
like the Zoomers
stand,
say stand
with the D. Stand.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
how do you stand him?
That could be a whole
or
segment.
Or stand him.
That could be a whole segment.
Yeah.
How does she stand Mike?
And listen, if they're paying for it, it's not expensive. What is it, $10 a month?
Yeah.
Okay, 2 coffees per month.
Yeah.
And you get a boatload of stuff.
Yeah.
And we're also going to be launching a new segment that's going to be going on the YouTube. But the Locals might have like behind the scenes bloopers of that, which would be great. So yeah, doinggreat.locals.com. I'll put the link up right on the screen here, and I'll put the link in the description as well. Other than that, it's Masters Week. The Masters are being played this week. No one else cares but me. So, Gina, if you'd like to introduce our guest for episode number 24, I think, go ahead and do that.
Sure. I'm so excited about today's guest. She's a friend of mine. She's my mom inspiration. She's a mom of 3. She's a brilliant woman who is very, very passionate about one of the most important issues happening in America today that nobody likes to talk about, and that's human trafficking. I'll just let you take it away from here. Landon Starbuck, welcome to the show.
Oh, that's so sweet. I'm your mom's inspiration. It's like, it makes my day. So I'm a mom of 3. And left Hollywood as a Billboard charting artist and just got sick of all the exploitation that happens in that industry. And I thought it was really just, there. And it wasn't in the rest of the world. I really didn't understand that. And I felt, led into that area of research. And so I spent like years just really understanding trauma, understanding the behaviors that drive the demand for this depravity, and realized it wasn't just Hollywood, but Hollywood's more or less the marketing arm for sexual exploitation as a whole, and just priming the American public to accept this all as normal. And so that was the piece that connected to my other work, which is really ultimately to focus on the most vulnerable, marginalized community, which is children. And so that's what my work is now. And I'm the founder and president of a nonprofit called Freedom Forever. And we focus on exposing the child exploitation and trafficking in America and what we can do about it. It's an activism-based organization, survivor informed, and that is, we're just getting started.
So talk us a little bit through how big of a problem is this in America? Because like I mentioned just before, it's one of those topics that I feel like is never talked about. You never really hear about it. And it's like the underbelly of so many different issues that are happening in America, the source of a lot of pornography, drug trafficking as well. So if you can share maybe some numbers or some broad information about how this is affecting America so much.
Right. So I think the first thing that people have to understand is there's the difference between child trafficking and child sexual exploitation. And when we have child trafficking, like globally, there's different types of, child labor and sex trafficking. But in America, the big problem is sex trafficking of children and child sexual exploitation. Now, trafficking is motivated by profit, whereas the child sexual exploitation, although you can profit from it, is motivated by pedophilia. And that is the thing that nobody wants to talk about. But we have an epidemic of pedophiles in our country. Everybody knows one. We don't know that we do, but we do, because the amount of child sexual abuse material, which is called CSAM, but people know it as child porn, is so prevalent in America that in any given area, people, if you had a map, it would light up all over the map, because we have 29.3 million reports to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, of sextortion, sex trafficking of children, child exploitation, all of these. And these are just reports. And we also know that only 1% of these crimes are actually reported. So this is an astronomical number. And if you just went on the border issue, right, how many children are trafficked across our border, which they suppress those numbers, we don't really know that. But just on that level alone, it's an epidemic. And then we're talking about what's happening online and all the CSAM that's proliferating, and that you have an explosion that people are actively keeping a secret in America.
Because the U.S. is the number one consumer of child rape videos.
Yes.
This sounds like a dumb question, but how on earth is that even possible? Like, how is that allowed?
I think that the number one reason we're the most, the biggest consumers of it is because our culture is lazy, entitled, and it self-pleasure based, narcissistic, right? So instead of having a purpose or, a need for survival, it's just a need to have self-pleasure. And so I think that is why so many people, particularly men, because yes, there's women involved in this, but men are the main consumers of this. And why are they not providing for their families? Why are they not attached to some purpose in their life? They're sitting at home playing video games and looking at Pornhub. And so that is the real, behavioral underpinning. But then you have the problem of pornography itself, which is the largest driver of this behavior, because the nature of it is that you get desensitized just like a drug, and one hit of the drug no longer gets you that high. And so then you're going to more extreme content until sadly they arrive, at the child exploitation content, and then they become pedophiles. It's as simple as that, unfortunately.
What's the I don't know if you have the numbers on this. What is the percentage of people who graduate from, let's just call it softcore porn or like normal porn, to pedophilic stuff? Do you know?
Well, there isn't a number because there's no regulation on this. And so if there were, they would be required to report that.
Okay.
But what we do know is the objective reality of what the algorithms are serving, right? Whether they're artificially stimulating those algorithms or not, we have the most downloaded content is violent, debasing content against women and childlike, fantasy, like rape fantasy, which isn't even a thing. And yet it is. But this like depraved content, right? So we're talking about crime simulation now. We're not talking about weird sexual things like people dressed in weird stuff. We're talking about, raping women, and it's like, oh, we're just acting, or raping children, but they're not children. Like we're simulating crime scenes and we're normalizing it.
Well, because I'm wondering, I'm sure that there are statistics around, what is the probability of someone who smokes marijuana to eventually, go gateway into like cocaine, heroin, other harder drugs. So I wonder what the probability of someone who watches porn to go into that sort of stuff. I mean,
yeah, I have a couple things that you just said okay. So two things. Every single survivor I've ever spoken with, it's a lot of them, have all said that number one, porn was used in their grooming, and that their perpetrator used porn. So that's one thing we know. The other thing we know from, people that go after these guys like Craig Sawyer is that all of these pedophiles, every single one they've ever caught, had a problem with pornography. Right. So at least we know that
That
that's
makes
about
sense.
100%, you know, across the board there, at least that we know their involvement in it and it, you know, as a catalyst.
So what took you out of Hollywood, out of music to start doing this? Because I'm wondering what the origin story is behind it.
Yeah.
You know probably, but I don't.
I know a little bit, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm trying to consolidate it because sometimes I'll talk too long about this, but I think it's important to understand the context of I came from a broken home. That's like very important to understand as part of, you know, why I decided to become a singer and think that my value was entertaining people. And I thought that, you know, subconsciously, of course, that, you know, I would move out there and I'd make a name for myself and I'd be this, you know, famous singer that brought people joy and that I would somehow get the love I didn't get from mom and dad, right? And so I think that is a self-fulfilling prophecy for a lot of people that seek that same pathway, right? And I, you know, was one of those people. So I was very naive when I got to Hollywood. I didn't know anybody. I interned under various producers. I got a record deal at 18. And I slowly had different experiences which revealed the sexual quid pro quo system. And while I'm happy to say I didn't actively participate in it, I didn't understand the red flags or see them for what they were. So when I would get offered something, and there's just so many examples I can't even like just hone in on one, but there'd be a situation where there'd be other girls up for the same thing, a tour or something like that. And I would go there, I would work my butt off to you know, have the best song, the best, you know, musicians, everything was great. And then this other girl would swoop in who was not as talented, didn't write her own material, wasn't a multi-instrumentalist. And I never felt good enough, right? So this is coming from those wounds from childhood, is I never felt good enough. And I would see these like other girls swoop in and get the job. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute, they're not as good a singer. They're not, you know, I did all this stuff. Why am I not good enough? And I finally realized it's because they're sleeping with the producer or it's because they're sleeping with the label exec, you know, and it took me, and I'm embarrassed to say how long it took me to figure this out in my 20s. Cause I was just like, I was so, you know, wounded thinking it was just me. I'm not good enough. And then I worked with enough people that helped build that self-esteem, that, you know, that built me, they maybe recognize my worth as an artist. And when I finally realized that and what was happening, I was like, you know, I just don't know if I can take part in this. I don't want to be the face of this. So, you know what? I'm just going to write for Disney girls. I'm going to write for other artists and score for television and film. I'm thinking that would be better. It was way worse because then I got to see other girls exploited. And what I didn't recognize then is even child trafficking. Yeah. And so many of these, you know, women today that come out, Britney Spears, you know, can't name other people, but you know, there's a lot, and it's their story to tell, but they're exploited sexually.
Were you successful in any of that? Like writing songs for people?
I was a Billboard charting artist. Yes. I was touring the country.
Really?
Yes.
And how about your writing?
Yeah, my writing as well. I wrote for several films that won Independent Film Festival, the National USA Film Festival.
Really?
Yeah. So I was very good at what I did and I loved it. But ultimately I don't feel like that was my true gifting. And I feel like that I was supposed to use my voice in a different way.
Was there a last straw moment involved?
There was several. I went through like a dark night of the soul, so to speak, of just like very deep depression. Because when I finally got to this dream that was promised, right? This like, oh, when you become, you know, you get some degree of success or you make money or you know everybody and that you're going to be happy. And I was miserable. And I looked around at all the people that I thought were supposed to be so wealthy and so successful and so happy. And they were miserable people doing all sorts of miserable things. And I didn't want that. And I realized like, this is a system. Like you participate in it. You befriend these people. You do the things they do or you're not part of it anymore. And I didn't want to be part of that system anymore. And so I decided like I had to leave, but I didn't have anything else I knew I wanted to do. And so it was like complete loss of my identity, right? And I just went through an identity crisis of like, well, who am I if I'm not entertaining people? Who am I if I'm not singing? Who am I? And that's when, you know, that's where my faith steps in, and it helped me find my identity through a higher purpose and a higher calling for my life. And that is like to be of service, you know, specifically. I think that is the most fulfilling thing for any human being, is to find a way outside of themselves to contribute while we're here on this earth, which we don't know how long that is. So that's basically why I left.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And then was there a case in particular or a piece of news or something that really kind of pushed you into doing what you're doing now?
Well, processing, going through that depression and healing the path of that, and like going through therapy and just uncovering all the experiences I had and unpacking all that, you know, from childhood all the way to like certain things that I went through and saw, I realized, oh, that was this was this person was manipulating, this person was doing this to this person. I'm going to go check and see how that person's doing. It just unearthed all of that. And so when I started realizing how the system operates, how far it extends in our culture, and then I see little girls growing up in America who are influenced by these people and they think, and they follow the same steps. I was like, no. Like we have to stop this pattern, this cycle, because this is so unhealthy and it's toxic in every way, especially for young girls. Because the most that they can hope for now is to have an OnlyFans account and pay off their student loan debt, taking off their clothes, you know? And so that's where my work begins is, you know, the culture change, transformation, driving the behaviors that are leading to like the worst outcomes, particularly for young women.
So these women or girls, young women who are exploited, where do these girls usually come from? Do they generally come from broken homes?
Yes.
And because that's what I'm thinking is that, so you mentioned Britney Spears, and I look at her videos now and people like to laugh like she's crazy, but if you look at her eyes, that is decades and decades of exploitation. I mean, it's easy to laugh her off and kind of be like, she's crazy. But I mean, now that she's sort of coming out and telling all these stories about what happened under her conservatorship and how they were pumping her with drugs and how they were treating her like she was less than, she just posted something, I think 2 days ago, maybe even yesterday, where she said that she was always silenced and she was treated like she was an object. And I'm thinking to myself, she must be just one of many, many, many women. And so how do they get their hands on these young women?
Well, I mean, there's a film, The Open Secret, I would suggest, just as a kind of glimpse into Hollywood and how it operates. But they, you know, these people are exploitive in nature and they exploit children. They put them in, you know, situations that are inappropriate. They groom parents. And a lot of the parents, you know, yes, they come from broken families, but it's also parents that are living vicariously through their kids. And these are parents that are willing to do pretty much anything for their kids to be stars or to bankroll them, right? So there's a lot of that happening. And I would remember these parents dropping their young girls off at studios with grown men, right? And there's nobody sitting there. There's nobody observing. There's nobody, you know, no boundaries, nothing. And, you know, this happens all the time. It's normal. Managers and children alone, casting directors and children alone, all of these things. So there's not really a standard protocol or anything like that. And I think that's one of the reasons that so many are exploited and they don't talk about it. And the more they realize how many other people are involved, that's their whole world and bubble. They don't realize it's not healthy. It's not normal. And you know, there's so many children that these people know. This is what the predators are, masters of exploitation, of identifying vulnerabilities. There's literally like manuals that they trade on this. It's pretty disgusting stuff online of how to identify. They like to find single moms, right? Because they don't have a dad. The number one greatest preventer of all types of this crap is strong adult males in the family, you know, protecting their home, protecting their little girls. And if you don't have that, it's much easier to access these children. And so they have a ritualistic, systematic way of reaching children, grooming them, grooming their parents. And it happens every day in Hollywood. And you know what? If you're a problem, if you get labeled hard to work with because, say, the mom is paying attention, or say, then you just don't get the jobs. It's simple as that. I'm not saying every job, every commercials, every book is some kind of predator, but I'm saying that the norm in Hollywood is for a woman, a successful star, to be raped. I mean, how many women do we know who haven't been raped? Yeah. That's really the question. I mean, it's like normal for all of them to be raped and talk about it. And so why would they do or say anything? Because that's normal to them. They come out in Vogue, they talk about it, and everybody's just like, oh, wow. Like
Rose McGowan.
Yeah, all of them. I mean, Britney Spears, Lady Gaga, Kesha, pretty much every mainstream female artist.
So when you see all the, not even memes, but people talking online about how Hollywood is full of pedophiles, that's not an exaggeration.
No, not at all. It's an open secret. That's hence the film Open Secret.
Do you think there's any legitimacy of these people, and they've mostly been musicians like Chester Bennington, Chris Cornell, about them committing suicide? Is there any legitimacy to those claims of people saying, oh, they are looking into child trafficking and they got because of that? Have you heard of
yeah,
that?
It's no question. People reach out to me all the time. I did do a cover song of Numb.
Linkin Park.
Sure, no connection there. So, I would say that, anybody who has fought this issue has had some kind of repercussions,
Really?
And that is true. I don't know the details of either one of those situations well enough. It's all speculative, but I do know that they were involved deeply in exposing this.
Really?
And if I was the family, I'd want to investigate. I think that I question everything that you're not allowed to question.
Yeah.
And I think those two situations, there's silence around, and you're not allowed to ask questions.
Does Kanye have any legitimacy about not wanting his daughter on TikTok?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a pop culture expert by any means today. Now I'm just a mom of 3 and I hate TV and I don't even know who's on the radio or anything going on. So when people ask me pop, I don't know what they're talking about this time, but I do know what you're talking about with that because it pertains to my world. But yeah, no parents, if they want to protect their kids online from sexual exploitation that is so rampant, it's very simple. Don't have your kids online.
Yeah.
There's the Gab phone. Don't have your kids on social media and then people say, well, what age, right? What is the right age to have your kids on social media? Well, what age are you comfortable giving your kid access to a world with pornography, predators, exploitive profiteers who are, capitalizing on these algorithms that steal your kids' data, create psychological profiles that they then go on to be exploited the rest of their lives. So what age is your kid fully equipped with the digital self-defense skills and wherewithal, knowing their own identity, having it already formed somewhat, right? To then be exposed to that. We would never drop our kids off at pedophile meetup night at a bowling alley, right?
Yeah. This is actually one of the reasons why I look up to Landon so much as a mom, because I've spent time with all 3 of her kids. None of her children are allowed on social media. And I always tell you and Robbie this, it is so refreshing. You'll meet her kids one day. It's so refreshing to see kids who are just kids. And I think that's something that is so lost in today's culture. Sometimes I get online, and now that we're on TikTok, I look at some of these videos and I'm like, you're 14 years old. What are you doing on this page? Or I like on Instagram, like somebody sent me a video of, just some girls doing the dances or whatever. And I'm like, you guys are children. I remember when I was like 13, I had bushy eyebrows. My mom wouldn't let me put on makeup or get like my eyebrows waxed. And I was just like kind of an awkward tomboy, as you should be when you're a child. Like, children deserve to have a childhood. And so when I spend time with your kids, it's such a nice reminder that not only do you protect kids from just the cesspool of content that's online, but you preserve their childhood in a way, that you preserve their innocence.
Yeah.
Like her oldest daughter, Scarlett,
how old's the oldest?
13.
Okay, nice.
She is a true 13-year-old. She looks like it. And even more than that, taking it a step further, they're so well adjusted and they have such great verbal skills because they don't spend time online. They spend time with humans and they talk and they communicate. Like, when they came over for dinner, my mom was like shocked at how well all 3 of the kids could communicate, because it's like, and that's a sad thing in a way because we don't see that very often. So tell a little bit more about your decision to not let your kids on social media and also how you talked them through that.
Yeah, 100%. So there's all these like tropes, right, about conservatives or Christians or, like we don't talk to our kids about sex and we just keep them from everything in like this isolated bubble. Like, we're not, isolating them, we're insulating them, from all the garbage, right? But my son is 9 and he can code and build websites. So I'm not anti-tech. I'm not anti-creativity and ingenuity and entrepreneurship. Both of my kids have these little startup businesses, right? But I want them to have a strong sense of identity, knowing who they are before the world and these algorithms tell them who they are. And here's the thing, even as adults, we're not immune to this manipulation. I mean, look at our elections, look at everything happening, like how many brainwashed people there are. It's not just kids that are impressionable, it's adults. But then you amplify that on a growing, developing mind. And I just want my kids at the end of the day, before I say, here, you're ready for social media, you're ready to navigate that world, I want to make sure they're really equipped. They know who they are, they know what their values are, and they know how to navigate all of this. So when they go on social media and, people are liking them or liking pictures of a friend who takes off their clothes or whatever, they know what that's about. They know what the demand is. They know what porn is. They know that they're, all of the systems, right? How they exploit, how they profit, how it's run, how ads are done, how these big tech companies operate. I want them to know all of these things so that they're not victims of exploitation, not just with sex and trafficking, but just as a commodity, you know? And so, you know, my goal is to raise pretty based kids about the world. Like they're pretty smart. I mean, even my littlest one, and she's my wild one, you know, she's my challenging one. She's got a lot of energy. So, you know, we'll see if I'm still, you know, an inspiration at the end of this. But I know I'm kidding. She's like the light of our life, but she's got a lot of energy.
She really does.
So I don't know. She's going to do something. But yeah, just, you know, I think that it's not just like keeping them from all that's bad. It's giving them a real childhood, like you said, and opportunities to refine and develop their identity and purpose and all of those things outside of this garbage, manufactured, synthetic, engineered world.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to parents who do want to shield their kids from social media, but it's a difficult conversation, or maybe they're met with a lot of resistance from their kids?
Yeah. So, okay, this is I put out a tweet yesterday and it kind of blew up about, you know, a radical Marxist takeover requires a radical resistance. Like we have to talk radically for a minute. Keeping kids in the government education system is going to make it very tricky to raise warrior children in this exploitive world, because you're saying one thing and doing one thing at home to the best of your ability, but your kids spend more time at school than they're virtually spending with you and at home in the system. And you drop them off at the school doors, and then they become sponges for all of this far left indoctrination and identity grooming that's happening. So it's the SEL, the social emotional learning, which is really just a Trojan horse for all this identity stuff that then primes them for the sexual stuff and the CRT. It's all connected. This is all Marxism, neo-Marxism. And so that is the number one thing, because then you really can't get to the next level of like, well, you know, their friends are doing it. Well, what environment are their friends doing it? Because if you're putting them in that environment, you know, they're going to be affected by that, and you're going to have those battles of like all of their friends have it. You know, you can't relate. There's not going to be common ground. It's like putting any one of us in a situation with people like that we have nothing in common with. Like it's not going to be very happy existence, right? So I think that environment is really important, and I recognize it's not easy for parents just to say, oh, you know, homeschool or pull your kids, and that's why we advocate for school choice, because that allows more options. And I think that, you know, this is one of the good things about capitalism is that these ideas aren't popular and they won't survive if there are true choices. Like if you're actually able to, as a parent, make the decision with your tax dollars of what's best for your kid. So that's like the biggest thing, because that is the biggest thing grooming kids is what's happening in schools. And part of that is them promoting the TikTok, all of these things. They actively promote this lifestyle of kids engaging with that. And so you're out of the loop as a kid. But the second thing is, I mean, there are ways like protect young eyes. There's ways of, you know, protecting your router at home and all of those things you have to do, keeping it in communal areas, you know, not ever allowing a kid to have a device in their room. But then there's Gab phones. There's ways for you to stay connected to your kid. My kid has a Gab watch. So if he's at soccer or something and he can, you know, call me and say, hey, so-and-so's mom's giving me a ride home. You know, but there's no internet access. There's no social media. So there's just no excuses for parents anymore of like, oh, I want to stay connected with them. The tech, they can still engage in tech, all of these things.
Wait, so is a Gab phone just a smartphone, but without any like internet apps on it?
Yes, they have a smartphone and a watch. Mm-hmm. So, and it's a great, and I made sure like they don't sell any of the content, you know, to any other third parties. They're not owned in China or anything like that. And so that's a great tool and resource for parents.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I've told friends before, because I've seen them post pictures on like Instagram or Facebook of, you know, their newborn infants or toddlers, like them like in a bathtub with the what's the thing, the inflatable thing that the Otteroo or whatever. Yes. And I'm like, take that down. Mm-hmm. I may sound crazy right now, but there is a dude looking at that photo in ways that you don't even want to think about. Trust me. Like, I know you think I'm being a little extreme right now, but I mean, that's the reality of it, right? There are guys getting off to pictures of little kids who are innocently just taking a bath and their parents don't know any better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that absolutely happens. And just out of respect for for our kids too, you know, their privacy, you know, because anything you put on the internet is there forever, you know? And you think about the exploitation and abuse of these girls like on social media, and boys too, they can't even get it down because social media is protected by Section 230. So it is very difficult to get their abuse down. Their abuse lives on forever, and they worry about people recognizing them, you know?
What's Section 230?
It is the Communications and Decency Act. And basically, when the internet was first formed, it was a regulation that made it so that people can't sue them as like a publisher. You know, they are able to do basically anything that they want. And, you know,
that's what Facebook claimed.
Yes.
Because people were trying to sue them for they're not a publisher, right? They're just a platform or something or whatever. So they're basically the town square. They're not like a New York Times or something like that.
Right. And so they really didn't take into consideration, or maybe it was intentional, who knows, of protecting, you know, how people are going to be exploited online. And like the fact that, I mean, there's many things that can be done to protect kids, just common sense stuff. But these companies, Facebook, all of them have profited off of the sexual exploitation of children and adults, of, you know, videos of their rape and torture, and have allowed it to cycle, and they have not pulled it. They don't have effective protocols in place, and they don't work effectively with law enforcement.
But they'll just take Trump off of Facebook.
Exactly. Completely. They can find that. They can find a conservative like a mile away. But
are there really like rape videos on Facebook?
Yes. In 2013, I believe it's 32,000 shares of infant rape.
What?
Before it was taken down.
God.
Yes.
But
And this happens all the time. You can organize, the MAPs organize, the pedophiles organize. They have pictures online. I mean, they organize on these platforms, but you know, the terrorists are allowed. You know,
even till today, like they're still able to do that. Till today,
there are still on Twitter, on Facebook, there are still records and reports of these girls and boys' rapes, and they cannot get them down. They keep getting uploaded. So there's definite legislation that is needed to protect them and to identify it. You know, we have tools, forensic tools like photo DNA, things like that. Actually far more advanced tools that people don't even realize, but we can't use them because we have to get through the firewall of Facebook and their privacy protections and, you know, and encryption. It's a whole messy world. But that's why one of the things that I work on, the Earn It Act, is the only thing we have, only piece of legislation truly that it has a chance of passing that is going to take that next step in protecting kids online.
What is that act?
Yeah. So it's called the Earn It Act, and it's essentially earning their liability protections. Like, hey, if you guys are going to, you know, have carte blanche to do whatever you want, you have to take these certain steps, which is, you know, it also changes the definition of child pornography to CSAM, so that, you know, there's a disconnect when people think child pornography. It's not a category. It's violent, horrible, you know, crime scene videos. And that's the way public really needs to see it, especially media. But it makes it so the victims can sue the platforms if their abuse is uploaded and they can't take it down. It makes it so there's a commission of best practices of, you know, leading experts, you know, including survivor experts that have established regulations. Now, it doesn't force them to. It doesn't take that next step, but at least establishes a commission of like best practices. So then you have a precedent for then legislatively going back in and saying, hey, you guys violated this, and this. You have not acted in good faith to protect kids online. So it's the next step. That's all we got.
And is it drafted legislation, or has it gone through any of the houses yet?
Yeah, it's gone. It's passed Senate. I believe it passed the Senate Judiciary Committee. I haven't gotten an update just this week.
Okay.
But it's been delayed.
Good.
Yeah, but this has been a 2-year process.
Oh, wow.
2 years of just trying to protect kids online with this bipartisan piece of legislation.
Ketanji
Brown Jackson.
Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Yeah.
What are your feelings about her, knowing that what you do for, you know, for your life's work, and knowing how she's been lenient on child pornographers?
Yeah. I mean, she, I think, adopted the most lenient sentencing in all of those cases. She's completely unqualified. She's shown a bias towards pedophiles and sex offenders, and an inability to use her power to effectively seek the maximum sentencing for child sexual abuse, you know, offenders. And for that, in my book, she's completely unqualified.
What do you think the driver of that is? Is that politics though, or is that like a person? Like, what do you think that is? Because if she, I mean, she presumably will be on the Supreme Court, and if that happens, she probably will be the most radical of the associate judges. But I mean, what do you think drives that?
The
Is that
ideology,
wokeness?
like the neo-Marxist ideology permeates into every facet, law, I mean, everything. When you look at the Soros-appointed prosecutors, right? Serious research and FOIA requests need to be done here. There's similar situations to what we're seeing with Ketanji. What is it? Ketanji
Jackson Brown.
Ketanji Jackson Brown.
Or Brown Jackson.
Yeah.
Brown Jackson.
Of lenient, the very consistent theme of lenient sentencing towards pedophiles, rapists, right? So we know when all the BLM stuff happened, they let rapists out. They let pedophiles out. We know that across the border, they let repeat child rapists come across our border that have already been deported. Let them cross over, right? They're the party of lawlessness, and where the connection is with that is they believe in bail reform. They believe in essentially abolishing the prison systems. They believe in sympathizing with pedophilia as a sexual orientation. They were born like this. They didn't choose this. That's where they're moving towards. So is
she treating it like, as a
ideology.
judge? Is she treating it like, well, these people have psychological problems, and I'm not going to sentence them to the maximum because it's not their fault. Like,
this is why they try to re-identify them as MAPS, minor attracted person.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. It's desensitizing the public to accept the next step, which is
and I mean we talked about that on one episode. I can't remember with who, but weren't we talking about people who don't act on their incredibly horrible urges? There's just something with pedophilia where even if you have that urge, I tend to not find any compassion for you there.
Yeah.
Even if you don't act on it. I mean, I don't know. I don't have that much grace.
I think we've all been a little desensitized. Like, if there's a murderer, do we have they were born a murderer? It's a crime. It's the most depraved crime. But if you murder somebody, it doesn't really matter how you felt. If you were on something, if you had psychological problem, you murdered somebody. You're going to jail. Goodbye. I think we have to have that same attitude with pedophiles, because also they're doing it to the most, innocent.
Yeah.
And there's just no excuses. There's no compassion. There's no remorse. Like they can take that up with God, but these people can never be allowed access to the public again.
Yeah, I think this is also just reflective of a society that does not value children at all anymore.
Yes.
Let's not forget that we are a society that murders, I believe, 2,000 babies in the womb every day, if not more. And now they just said in California, today actually is the first day of hearings for a measure called AB 2223, which allows not only a woman to kill her child in the womb at any point of pregnancy, but also allows a woman to kill her child up to 7 days after birth. And that it prohibits coroners from examining the baby's death as well. This is being introduced in California. So it's sickening, it's disgusting. And it's no surprise that we have somebody like Ketanji Brown Jackson who is sympathizing with pedophiles when we live in a society that places no value at all on the most innocent lives in our culture, in our society, which is, you can judge an entire society by the way they treat the most vulnerable and the most innocent. And the way that we treat our children and the way that we treat preborn babies in the womb who are the most innocent is just indicative of what a rotten culture we have.
I read that Colorado too just put something, I think they signed it to law, is up to 9 months.
That's right.
Up until the point of birth.
Yes.
Yeah, up until the point of birth. And it's and this is what happens when you put any kind of qualifier on when a human life is a human life. Either human life begins at conception, or either it's worthy at conception or it's not worthy at all. This is how we end up with qualifiers like, well, if the baby has a heartbeat, then you can't kill her. Oh, if the baby is conscious, then you can't kill her. Oh, if the baby can feel pain. And it's you can put those qualifiers on adult humans at any point.
Yeah. What's the oh God, I just forgot what I was gonna say.
Because I was fired up.
Yeah, no, it was something.
I distracted you.
No, it was something that you said about not what the quality of life for the child. Before we get to questions, I completely lost that. I'm so upset with myself.
If it comes to you, just tell us.
Before we get to questions, what about physical abductions of children to then traffic them in the States? How often is that occurring?
Not as often. It's happening mostly online, the child exploitation
part. Okay, so the physical,
the abduction, the man in the van, the creepy man in the van, that's not happening as often as people think. It's not.
But how are they getting the access to these kids to film this stuff, then put it online?
Brainwashing, grooming.
Really?
Yes. And you know who's helping? Teachers.
Really?
Teachers in schools are helping. When you're violating body safety 101, right? Parents need to teach your kids secrets. No adult should be asking you to keep a secret.
Yeah.
What's happening at school?
Right.
Secrets, right? Gender, you can come to me, you can trust me. What they're doing is they're making teachers and kids on equal footing. And so that indoctrination, that relationship is happening. Again, this goes very deep into the neo-Marxist agenda, because they're they're turning children into adults. They're tapping into the sexuality early. They're destroying the innocence because they fundamentally believe that innocence is a byproduct of cis, heteronormative culture, all of these things, and they want to erase it. They don't believe that they believe that also in Keynesian theory, who is a prolific pedophile, that kids are sexual from birth. So they don't have the same normal outlook you and I do about kids and their innocence. They and they won't admit that yet. We're not quite there yet, but they will get there. They're already there with the sexual rights global agenda, right? So it's just trickling out. We've had even UNICEF come out and say, well, there's no evidence porn is harmful to children. Oh, and then they got in trouble, and then they retracted the statement. So they're rearing their head, and they're kind of testing the waters, and they're injecting this into radical sex ed, where in the more Democrat states where they can get away with it. This is coming. People need to be aware.
A teacher in Florida is upset that he can't talk about his weekends with his partner.
Yeah, he's so
to
mad.
His kids.
Yeah,
they're
did
your
you
students.
see that clip?
They're not your kids. Dude.
Did you see that clip of
Yes,
the teacher? Yeah,
yes.
he's upset that he can't talk about paddleboarding with his gay lover or something.
They want to know. No, the kids want to know everything. Of course they want to know what their teacher did on the weekend, but they are your students. They're not.
Also, I don't ever remember as a kid being interested in anything that my teacher did on the weekend.
We didn't want to know.
I don't care.
We didn't want to know. They weren't our friends.
No, they weren't our friends. I mean,
don't make people your friends who aren't supposed to be your friends. Your spouses, your teachers, your bosses. They're not your friends. I'm sick of all this.
Should we get into
questions? Get into the questions while I try to think what I wanted to say before.
Okay, and we mentioned Marxism a lot, and there were a couple of questions about Marxism. So here's a good one. Is the origin of Marxism satanic?
If you're looking at just examining the values, from a spiritual context, yes, because you look at, it wasn't Gramsci, it was the other guy from Hungary, okay, that was kind of like the father of, the sex ed, the radical sex ed, right, tapping into sexuality. And if you look at the roots of that guy, he was a very hostile, person towards Christianity. And if you look at our value systems, not just in America, but really, any value system, it's Judeo-Christian values, right? Mm-hmm. Even globally. And so they want to destroy that because that is connected to, our whole culture. And neo-Marxism is about subverting the culture.
Right.
So all of that is connected to those value systems. So it's about destroying fundamentally religion or spirituality. So yes, I think that there is definitely, especially when you're talking about all the sick stuff with regarding children and letting these horrible offenders out of jail. Yeah, that's evil stuff right there.
Yeah, because the thing about Marxism, and this is important for people to understand, is that the whole purpose of Marxism is to replace God and religion with the state.
Yeah.
So that at the end of the day, the last answer, the final say, comes from the state. It doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from any sort of religious morals. So, I mean, I guess...
and subverting the nuclear family, which is encapsulates the value system.
Right.
So that's why we're seeing the schools as the battleground, because we're turning children against the parents. We're creating that friction.
Here's another Marxism question. Apart from being indoctrinated in schools, why do young people drift towards Marxism?
Well, I think that they synthetically create the divide first. And there's that natural instinct with kids, finding their own identity to want to push up against something. That's all a natural part of growing up. But when you have this synthetic push from these educators who are aligning themselves as friends, not educators, not in that typical authority dynamic, they think that their identity now, that they have to fight for it, right, to be validated by the world because they're oppressed. So they're being convinced now they're oppressed. They divide it by a group, and then their parents are bigots. Then they're being convinced that they are the actual oppressed group, right? And now their parents are trying to affirm their biological gender, their real gender. And so it's systemically taking all the values and completely dismantling their value system, which creates fracturing in the home, and then creating that permanent division, which now your family is who validates you as a person. Your family is who's safe to talk to about your problems. Your family is the one who sees you for who you truly are. But it's all been engineered that way, right? And so then you have kids rejecting their families, and they're thus the entire value system that came with it.
Right. Wow. Here's another one. How to bring more people to God without sugarcoating the Bible or forcing people?
I mean, I don't know if I do a good job of this, but I try to every day. I don't throw Bible verses at people. I just try to pray with my feet, walk the walk. I think that is the most effective Christianity I've ever seen. I don't want to hear people, preach to me or, put themselves on some superior moral footing. I just want to see who they are. And that's how I, want people to think of me if they think of me in the context of faith or Christianity, of doing the works, not talking about it.
Yeah, I love
Good
that.
for you.
We talk a lot about that on the show here. Yeah.
We shouldn't talk about religion though, because we lose a lot of people.
We had a YouTube commenter who said that
I love
mad.
bringing up the YouTube comments.
Yeah, he's mad that we're having a lot of Christians on the show, which I actually counted.
No,
4
it's
out of
not.
our 11 guests.
It's
are
not even Christians on the show. It's like just talking about Christianity.
Yeah.
And from like a non-Christian point of view, I'm just always interested to talk about it.
Yeah.
But he's like, you're losing so many people. And I'm
Yeah.
like, our subscriber numbers is just growing. So I don't know.
And it's also, and I texted this to you, that is such a very typical atheist response, is that it's so selfish. They need all of the content to cater to them. Because atheism at its core is selfish. To think that to deny the natural order, and to think that you know more than God, and to think that you know more than the natural hierarchy that is set, like that is a selfish thing.
There's plenty of that content on YouTube. Like there's plenty of atheist content. There's plenty of secular content. There's plenty of religious content. But the fact that, we speak most of the time to conservative people, it's not a surprise that they would happen to be Christian.
Yeah.
You know what I
Well,
mean?
what's the problem with Christianity? Like just being a Christian. Like, obviously there's, issues with every religion, but like, why is that offensive, like innately?
Yeah, that's also my
triggering,
question.
That's probably a personal thing with whoever that person
exactly.
is. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's another one. How to take America down a more traditional path. Some patriarchy is good in my opinion. That's from David Benway. So he's asking, how do you think we can take America down a more traditional path and return to traditional values?
Yeah. Sorry, I was like thinking about the patriarchy comment. I think it's how you define that, because I think what he's trying to say is like male leadership is important.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call that patriarchy. I would just call that like men are a very important part of a healthy functioning society, and male leaders are very important. And yeah, what was the second part of that? Values or
I think
traditional?
he's saying, like, to him, he thinks that some patriarchy is a good way to return to traditional values. But I think it's what you're saying. I think what David is trying to say is that we do need very strong male leadership, and we need to be looking to men to lead us, and we need strong men to step up.
100%.
Fathers, be good to your daughters, as John Mayer says.
Yeah.
And what's the next line?
Daughters, be good to your father. Like
daughters, be good to your fathers.
Mothers, be good.
Girls become lovers, so turn into mothers. Like, so girls, be good to your fathers too. See, I was right. It was like,
I like that song.
I like John Mayer.
I like old John Mayer.
I know, me too.
I was listening to Why Georgia the other day. I liked that album.
Oh yeah.
Room for Squares.
Yes.
Groom for squares.
Room.
That's what I thought you said.
This is a great question that I wanted to ask you too. What can I do at home to help protect kids? I guess we'll just broaden that question. Is what can we do?
Yeah.
Watching all of these horrors unfold, what can we do?
All right. Number one, shameless plug, my nonprofit, freedomforever.us. You can go there because there's, constant activism that we need. We're an activism-based organization. So whether it's legislation that's needed in your state, we're going to have a comprehensive state map. So there's a lot of different things activism-wise. But if you're trying to protect, children from, your children from the home on the inside out approach is what is needed. And that's something we're developing right now that is a survivor-informed model called the Freedom Model. And basically, it gives you tools from the inside out how to prevent child exploitation and trafficking, and starting with preventing grooming. And that's where we talked about earlier with the schools, all of those things.
What was the documentary with the girl from Smallville and like the cult that was grooming women into this cult? And was it Nexium or something like that?
Yes,
Nexium.
Allison Mack.
What's up with what's that sort of stuff?
What is that?
That's
there's
not
a
children
lot of this creepy
focused,
stuff.
right?
Did y'all hear Jared Leto has like a cult?
Jared Leto, yeah, I've heard he had a cult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
wait, he's
has
the leader
one.
of a
yeah,
cult?
where a bunch of women wear white and they come and like worship him, or it's a creepy deal. I don't know much further. Somebody sent me some stuff on it. But
he seems like the type of person.
But it's full of Hollywood is full of narcissistic males.
Yeah, it's not surprising
that have a lack of power, and so they exercise that need to get power by domineering women. Like,
But
it's
the
weird.
dude is like an A-list actor. So, I mean,
Yeah.
what is missing from his life where he feels like he needs to do that, where he needs that sort of fake adoration?
A sense of purpose and service towards others. He's serving himself.
Now, do we know
The God is himself.
Do we know if the groomer himself, the cult leader himself, these predators themselves, do they come from broken homes as well?
Well, I would argue anybody who's operating from that paradigm of exploiting others for personal gain have to have some kind of broken foundation, right? Like to some extent, right? But then there's people that say, well, they came from a good home. And I don't know. I never really believe that, like when people say that, because I think that's kind of subjective. Like from the outside, they might have had the nuclear family, like a mom or dad.
Right.
But do we really know what was going on there? Because I just can't. If that's the case, then there'd be a lot more serial killers and rapists and all of that if like the nuclear family was just failing, like the structure just didn't work, right? We'd have way more evil in the world.
Well, there are a lot of, especially going back at least a generation. I mean, there are a lot of musicians I can think of that have turned out. I'm thinking of Brian Wilson in particular, just having what would be seen as a nuclear family, a mother and a father, but just having one domineering parent where the other one's very quiet to do anything, where that's not helpful or healthy either.
Right.
I think if there's a good balance between mother and father raising the children, then it would be rare that there would be a negative outcome from that.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Healthy functioning families is not just like we'd want a father in the home and a mother. It's like there's more to that, you know?
Right.
So I think healthy families are the best prevention we have against all forms of evil and depravity, but definitely for child exploitation and trafficking, because in every one of those cases, besides porn use being a common denominator, lack of father, lack of
the overwhelming majority of them.
Yes, lack of father, because in every one of those cases, I would ask, where was the father? And he was nowhere to be found. So he was either incarcerated, or he was absent, or he was there and looking at porn himself, or he was the one. In many cases, familial sexual abuse. This is more likely than not of some random stranger. So that's the other issue, is that's happening, is the corruption within the family.
Sorry, I got excited.
Did it come to you?
Yeah. What was that you said about the cases of abortion, saying that the baby is killing the mother, and you said something along the lines of no doctor would ever abort a baby for the health of the mother. What did you say?
So abortion is never medically necessary. That is a myth that has been perpetuated by the abortion industry, which is propped up and funded by the federal government. Abortion is never medically necessary. Now, what people claim to be a medically necessary abortion is something like an ectopic is the word, right? Ectopic pregnancy, where the child needs to be removed from the woman's body in order for the woman to live.
Right.
And unfortunately, in virtually every single
More
one
times
of
than
those
not, those
cases,
kids.
the child dies in that process.
Right.
That is not an abortion. This is very important for people to understand. There is never a medical reason for a doctor to go in and murder the child and the life of a child inside of a woman's body. Now, like I said, there are cases where a woman's health is in danger and her life may be in danger, but that's not an abortion. That's a medical procedure that unfortunately, sadly, ends in the child's death.
I want to get the preacher from Apologia Studios on the show, because he was talking about I think there was something where people from his church were going into the dumpsters behind Planned Parenthood and taking the body parts and bodies out because they wanted to give the kids a proper burial or something like that. And I think I read Unwoke Narrative posted something about pro-life advocates were found with bags of body parts as evidence, saying they're cutting them up and then just dismembering them. It's awful.
Well, they just found those 5 bodies in DC.
Yeah.
Was that maybe what I was reading about?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the pictures were circulating online. I did not look at them. I haven't seen them.
I can't. I don't want to.
Yeah, I don't want to. But
what was the story?
The story, if I'm saying this correctly, is that there were anti-abortion activists who gathered the remains of 5 babies.
Right. Okay. Right.
Some of these babies were killed after they were born.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
But they won't do autopsy. But they for the same reason.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
How closely do you work with anti-abortion activists? Do you work with them at all, or you guys are kind of in different?
I'm not. I don't work with any anti-abortion activists, but I am very much pro-life. And what solidified that for me? Well, I wouldn't say solidified. What made that even more my viewpoint stronger is knowing that fundamentally they believe that, you know, a human being doesn't have value. And human life is not based on if we're wanted or convenient, because if that's the standpoint, then why is any traffic kid or any kid in foster care, they don't matter.
Right.
They're unwanted and inconvenient.
Right.
You know, that's what we really take as, you know, grooming our culture is, if it's okay to kill something that's not a human being that's unwanted and inconvenient, then it's okay to exploit them. It's okay to traffic them. It's okay to do all of those things because their consent doesn't matter. They're unwanted or inconvenient.
Yeah. There's one question I wanted to ask you. We've mentioned the border a couple of times.
Yeah.
Why is the southern border such an issue when it comes to trafficking? Because we've heard that talked about a lot, and I don't know if many people know exactly how it's connected and how prevalent the issue is down at the southern border.
Yeah, I mean, it's an open trafficking operation. I went down there. I organized the largest coalition demonstration down at our southern border. It happens out in the open. Adult males bringing over these young girls. In some cases, they're drugged, and they're making millions of dollars every day, these cartels, and they do it out in the open because under this administration, there's no consequences, there's no repercussions, and they've abolished a lot of the successful policies that were designed to help mitigate the issue of trafficking, which one of them was rapid DNA testing. They stopped that under this administration, and it was designed to, the spin the left put on it was the family separation, which was done the same under Obama. Right. But it was done for the purpose of making sure that these children being brought over are truly with these families.
So the Obama administration was doing the DNA testing?
No, they were separating. There was still some DNA testing being done, yes. But that's where the family separation started.
Yeah. Right. But then Trump started doing that administration started doing DNA testing?
Well, yeah, so Trump actually increased the amount of DNA testing.
Okay.
When you do that, you increase the amount of family separations in some situations, which is where the left, spun that whole thing out of control, which was unfair. There's so many people being brought over. Like I have contacts on the ground there now, in Border Patrol, and a baby drowned in the river last week. A girl drowned, a 4-year-old girl drowned 2 weeks ago. So, the idea that open borders are compassionate, like when unaccompanied minors, over 200,000 unaccompanied minors in 1 year, that means the child's already been exploited. Like leaving a kid out in a desert where 70% of little girls get raped under these rape trees, that's already exploiting a child. And the incentives that the Democrat Party keeps putting out there, like this is the humane approach, when they have no intention once they cross over of opening their doors to these children or paying their health care or any of their trauma-informed care. But on top of that, all of these numbers are being suppressed. You can't, I'm putting in FOIA requests because we don't know how many are being raped. We don't know. They're not reporting it.
One of the best Gavin videos of all time. He went to a Trump rally in 2016, I want to say, on Long Island. And he was talking about border crossings and just this issue about the border. And he said to this girl, this was, 7 years ago. He said to this girl who was, anti-Trump, he was saying, do you know that 70% of the women who are brought across the border are raped? 70%. And the girl was like, by who? And Gavin was like, by coyotes. And she was like, coyotes, goodbye. And he's like, they didn't want to pay attention to the number of women. That's basically 2 out of 3 women. But they got more upset at him for saying the word coyotes, for being politically incorrect.
Right. And I just read this probably 3 days ago. I hate even saying this, but they found a girl who was 12 years old at the border, and they found 22 semen samples inside of her. And semen samples are only good for 24 hours. 22, 12-year-old girl. I may be getting the age wrong by a couple of years, but 22 semen samples within the span of 24 hours.
This is why I even push back against the term pro-life, because I think there are certain lives that I am pro being gone.
Yeah, that's why. I mean, I've said this before on the show.
Anti-abortion.
I don't like the terms pro-life and pro-choice. I think both of those terms are propaganda because they're not two sides of the same coin. To be pro-choice, that's like saying that you're pro-choice because you think a man should have the choice to rape a woman. That's why I prefer to use the terms pro-abortion and anti-abortion.
I think that's a good call.
Because this even the term pro-life, it's like it's just propaganda.
Yeah, it gets tough because they always bring in the capital punishment situation. Well, if you're pro-life, then how could you how can you advocate for capital punishment, for death row, for death sentences? And I'm saying,
well, the answer is pretty easy because
Yeah.
once you commit a heinous crime, you lose your right to live and function in a civilized society.
That's
agree.
right.
But
There's
that's-
consequences.
But that's a different discussion when it comes
Right.
to
So, yeah,
capital punishment.
Are we, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was such a good episode. We're going to have you on again, Landon.
Yeah.
It's funny
Love
because
to.
her other half is on his way over here, which is so her husband, Robbie, is running for Congress. He's our future congressman, I should say that. And whenever they do fundraisers and stuff, everyone always goes up to Robbie after and they're like, your wife is so great. Why isn't she running for Congress?
Thank you.
So Landon, tell everybody where to find you.
Okay, so landonstarbuck.com, Landon Starbuck on all socials, and then my nonprofit, freedomforever.us. We're just getting started, so come join the mission.
Awesome.
Thank you guys
Landon.
for having me.
Yeah,
Thank
of
you
course.
so much for coming. We'll put all the links down below too.
I'll do that.
Okay. Enjoy the cookies. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you.